right. So, Richard, thank you for the introduction. Rebecca, thank you for having me here. I think the Marriott crew has also done a fantastic job this time. We've certainly progressed since the last year. Bigger ambience, more plush. Looks good. Everything looks good. So, really privileged to be here. All right. As I typically start, since many of you may not be familiar about Wipro, I'll give you a small introduction into who we are. Moving on. All right, so we are India's third largest IT services company. The last financial year, we closed at about 7.6 billion US dollars in terms of revenues. We release our annual results next month for the current financial year. We currently work with about 1,100 customers. We have about 170,000 employees we work with. We are rated number one in global sustainability indices, as well as the world's most ethical company in the software services category for the last 5 years in a row. We currently work out of 100 countries, and we have offices in 65 of them. Moving on. Our global revenue share, 52% still comes from the US, but the fastest growth is happening in Europe and India, as well as Asia Pacific. Most of these markets, especially Asia Pacific, has a growth rate of close to 30%. Moving on. This is what we're doing in the Philippines. We are currently in Manila as well as Cebu. We started off in Cebu and then later expanded into Manila. So currently, the slide numbers may be a little dated, but we are about 4,600 employees in the Philippines. We do a lot of IT work out of Manila, and Cebu is a pure play business process services location for us. All right, moving on. So this is what we've been doing in the Philippines. I think two perspectives. One is Philippines for global delivery, in which we are servicing customers in global markets. And then there's Philippines as a market by itself. I think I don't need to qualify Philippines as a location for global delivery. I think pretty much all my peers in the room have similar stats to report. But a very remarkable journey, healthy growth rates. And if at all I would add one thing to that, I would say that the Philippines is our most happiest center, globally, out of all these 65 countries that we work in. So that's one added testament statistic that I'm proud to quote beyond revenue and margin numbers, to my leaders. All right, so Philippines as a market, I think GDP growth has been pretty resilient, till date, even, due to the cooling down of ASEAN because of the oil crisis which we have. I think we're still on line to produce about a 6% GDP growth. We are seeing a lot of increased attention in the retail as well as especially the fast-moving consumer goods segment. This is also an area which we are contemplating an acquisition because some of you may know that Wipro is a conglomerate. We have interests in retail, infrastructure engineering, and consumer care. We have interest in eco-energy and various other businesses. So this is something that we are also looking at entering. We are also very confident in the PPP or the public-private partnership programs which are running in the Philippines. This is being aided by the recent win of GMR, which is a company we work with very closely in terms of airport modernization in India. So their JV with Megawide to modernize Cebu as an airport is something that has aided our confidence. All right, so that's the Wipro stuff, and now let's move on to the more important ones. Now, the thing about this session is that, this session, quite late into the noon, is that most of the topics that I want to talk about are mostly, washed. Washed, rewashed, and, pretty much bleached out of color at this point. I learned this the last time, so this time I've modified my presentation to probably try and talk about subjects which have not been approached. All right, so I thought I'd put in a slide in terms of what is the state of the world as we know it today, and what do we think is going to happen in the years to come, and with an IT services perspective. So moving on to the next slide. All right, so to start things off, I'd say what is the state of the economy, a bird's eye view, as it stands. So the fact is there is, excess liquidity in the market. There is a gap between stock prices versus earnings of companies, and this is notably higher than the pre-recession periods of 2002 to 2007. There are bubbles being built up, and if there's any indication of what happened in China last year, I think we are not over the effects of it yet. There is an energy crisis, but this is not because of the shortage of energy, but rather because of energy being used as a geopolitical weapon right now, right? Because of shale and oil, you have OPEC countries reacting to that, et cetera, et cetera. So that's going on. Now, point number one, which is stock market bubble. Now, this is also led by the excess liquidity in the market. And because of the investment conditions across the world, there are only two favorable areas where investors are typically or highly investing. And one is, of course, the equity markets, and the other is the real estate market. So what you have is a simultaneous real estate bubble. Now, to quantify impact on this, I'd say until 2014 or 15, when I have the data, real estate prices in the world, notably in emerging markets, has had significant increases. 80% in Brazil, 60% in China, 15% in Canada. The stats are amazing, right? And in most countries, the rate of inflation in terms of property prices is dramatically overtaking wage inflation, right? So there is a crisis, and of course, notably affected are the middle class. Corporate failures. This is something that, is something that of a trend that is worrisome. In 1982, there were 61 companies, in the US who were AAA rated. As of 2015, there are 3, right? The norm for companies these days is to be BBB rated, BBB rated, right? And if you assume that for BBB rated companies, that the rate of default is 4% every 5 years, by the time we are into 2020, 16 of the companies in the S&P 500 list would have defaulted or gone bankrupt. One of them could be Enron, or the next Enron, right? Next is geopolitical crisis. Now, why is what's happening in Syria, Ukraine, etc., why is that important? This is important because of the financial linkages between countries these days. It is an open trading platform. It's an open market. What happens in one country will resound in global financial markets. And we've seen the effects of that last year in the global stock markets. Poverty crisis. Well, the world has gotten richer. The percentage of people who live in absolute poverty has come down. But the absolute percentage of poor in the world have increased. Now, the only real solution for this could be taxations, but that also hinders competitiveness of countries. So this is something that will require smart solutions into the future. And lastly is the cash crisis. As I said, there is excess liquidity. If you look at previous historical numbers, companies and individuals have more money than ever before. Citigroup, the last time I checked, they had about $300 billion in cash. Right? Apple has $200 billion in cash. Now, if via moral obligations or social obligations, they were to unload this into society, we would have hyperinflation, right, as a result. So there are a whole bunch of problems that are there. But then I thought, after sending this presentation, I thought, did I cover everything? Or maybe did I leave out something? And I realized I left out the most important point, which I thought I would reapproach during this presentation. And that is climate change. The future as we know it, all of this will be dwarfed by climate change if the world economy doesn't act. We are looking at predicted rise in global temperatures by about 6 degrees in 2020 if nations and companies and individuals do not act. The cost of preventing that is $100 billion yearly, right? This is particularly important how it affects, because if you look at 1980, from the 80s till now, the number of global catastrophic incidents which have happened have risen from 291 in 1980 to 904 in 2014. There have been severe rises in climatological, hydrological, and meteorological events which have happened globally. In the future, we perceive that every action, regardless whether it is an individual level, a corporate level, or a country level, will be faced to the acid test of how does it work, in the context of climate change. So, moving on. disruptive forces in the market. What do we see that are, that are acting as we, the forces in the market? I'll not talk about renewable energy right now because I have a slide on that, but let's look at some of the other points, which is energy storage. When laptop lithium-ion batteries were first introduced, from then and until now, in the last 15 years, the rate of reduction in price has been approximately 15% per year. I don't know how many of you know about battery mega factories, which are right now coming up. Tesla has announced a $5 billion investment in the US, which is going to create about 5,000 jobs to produce batteries. This, combined with investments from BYD, LG, etc., will see massive revolutions in energy storage due to further declining costs in terms of energy storage. This is going to aid the renewable energy, which I'm going to talk about later. Genomics. Why is genomics important? In 2001, it cost $100 million to sequence an individual's DNA. As of last year, the same activity could be completed for $1,000. So imagine if you were to go to the doctor in the future and just give him a blood sample, he would have a sequencer right in front of him, sequencing that DNA for you and giving you a diagnosis basis your genomic sequence which just came out. This could dramatically alter healthcare as we know it, from being a more reactive-based solution to a more proactive, solution. Again, 3D organ printing, 3D tissue printing, $537 billion market. In tomorrow, we could be 3D printing organs. How does this affect the world? Increased life expectancy, right? So if the HR folks at ADP are not worried enough that people are not retiring too fast, how about the fact that they will be working probably 2 years additionally, because of increased life expectancy? Autonomous vehicles, I have another slide coming on that, so I'm not going to spend time on that. Advanced robotics and automation, I do have another slide. Cloud technology, the most vulnerable companies here are the large companies, because in the SME segment, the small, medium, enterprise segment, higher rates of cloud adoption would mean that these companies now have access to IT and back office activities at a much faster rate and much cheaper rate, which allows them to go to market very, very quickly, right? Leaving the large organizations pretty much vulnerable. And of course, from the consumerization of IT, wherein IT expenses are going to be variabilized and not capitalized in books of accounts, would only surge this phenomenon. Internet of Things, estimated to be $11 trillion opportunity by 2025. Estimates are that there will be 10 billion devices which are connected by 2020. That's more than one for every human being, on the planet. The differentiator really will be big data and analytics coming out of this unstructured data that comes out of this. Companies which use big data have a potential opportunity to leapfrog their competition, right? And there are many instances of companies who successfully do that these days. I'll give you a small idea. I don't know how many of you have been reading the news about virtual reality. Oculus Rift. Have you been tracking the news? Oculus Rift announced pre-orders for $800, $600 a piece, right? HTC has got a similar offering for $800. Sony has just come out with something for $400, right? Now imagine if you had virtual reality. Everybody assumes that that's going to be for games or it's going to be for multimedia. But what if a retail store just decided to go virtual, right? They would just, you could just launch your VR, you could just walk in the store in the virtual environment, keep selecting products, and it would automatically be added into your e-commerce, a shipping, and then it gets home delivered. Imagine the kind of transformation that's out there, right? With the use of technology. They always say that when two digital technologies intersect, right? The possibilities are infinite, right? And this is also one of the themes that Wipro proposed in Davos this year, which was innovation at the intersection. All right, we'll talk more about this when the slides go by. So moving on. I thought I'd just put this there, in case what I just said, invoked a lot of anxiety, that the secret of change is to focus all your energy, but not on fighting the old, but on building the new. So that being said, I'm going to move on to some of the points which I did not cover in the previous slide, which is, moving on, renewable energy. Some illustrations. So I'm reading this fantastic book by Tony Seba called Clean Disruption, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about it. There's a wave of disruption already here. There's a new energy era of distributive, mobile, intelligent, and participatory. This, as compared to the existing architecture of oil generation, which is centralized, command and control oriented, secretive, and extractive, is posing what I would call significant developments to the way we think about energy. If you look at solar photovoltaic costs, for the benefit of not saying that again, I'm going to say PV, it has come down 200 times ever since it has been introduced. Currently, it takes about 50 cents to produce 1 watt of energy. That's a cost improvement of 200 times. Look at the growth rate in terms of the solar PV installed capacity. Growth rate, 42%. Growth rate at this point. Since 2000 to 2014, 132 times. If you were to extrapolate this to the future, solar is capable of meeting the entire demand of the human population, energy demand, by 2030. Again, so what is the cost improvement in terms of traditional oil energy? Well, petrol prices in 1900s were $5 a barrel. The last time I checked, right, it's probably 20, but then for the sake of comparison through the last century, it was about $50, $60 a barrel, yes? Through the last century. As opposed to that, 100 watts to 50 cents, right? No more a model wherein you step on the gas and somebody else makes money. You step on the gas and somebody else in another country has to pay more for a liter of fuel. It's no more going to be like that. Solar energy is abundant, and this wave of change is upon us. Complemented in supplementary increases in battery technology, production via battery mega factories, and energy as a service offering. In California, 80% of solar energy is third-party financed. It's sold as a service. A business model aiding a technological disruption. And that's where what I would say, disruption happens. This has the potential to make solar skyrocket. Moving on. This is about autonomous vehicles. Although you may not realize it right now, that's Fifth Avenue in New York in 1900, full of horses and horse-driven carriages. The same photo in 1913, no horses. Right? We've seen this disruption happen before. And today, as we see it, we are in the last couple of years before the internal combustion engine, which drove the first industrial revolution, dies out. Once solar comes in, all of this, or renewable energy sources come in, none of this is going to exist the way we know it. Cars are second biggest capital expense after homes. Yet, the average car is parked 96% of the time. 4% asset utilization rate. This is a disruption waiting to happen. And as you've seen it, it's already there. Cars by Tesla are more safer than any other car made in the world. And yet, an SUV by Tesla has the potential or the horsepower or a similar performance as a Porsche Carrera 911. Right? So it's just there. Drastic reduction in cost of computing power. 1 million time improvement in the last 15 years. The cost of computing, the cost per teraflop, has come down significantly in the last 15 years. Sensory technology via light detection and ranging devices. This is the device that bounces light, reflects it back, and calculates whether there's an object in the way and what is the time to impact. The cost of that has improved from $70,000 in 2012 to just $1,000 in the last 3 years. There are fundamental revolutions happening there. There is a combination of technology innovation. So on one side, you have the technology innovation, which is the electric car, plus the business innovation, which is Zipcar, you have Lyft, Uber, etc. All of this, which are going to make this model skyrocket. Moving on. We talked about Internet of Things. I'm going to try and breeze through this slide in the interest of time. We're classifying this into industrial internet, infrastructure internet, and consumer internet. I think I mentioned a data point wherein this is going to be an $11 trillion market. You can see the market segmentation in terms of the opportunities which are out there. So industrial internet available, the market size about 151 billion. Infrastructure internet via e-governance, e-citizenship, smart transportation cards, etc. Potential of 392 billion. And lastly, the big ticket item, which is the consumer internet. As we embrace wearable technology, right? This is something that is set to explode. There are different estimates in the market, 10 billion devices, 20 billion devices. But if you go by anything, or looking at an average of wearable devices carried by people in this room, you know what I'm talking about. I carry 4 with me anytime. I have my Fitbit, I have my Apple Watch, I've got one phone in my pocket, I've got one phone in my laptop bag. And all of this, if goes by, if we go by averages, which are happening right now, I'd say this is one of the biggest opportunity areas in the technology space going forward. We all talked about robotics. Moving on. This is a slide of what's going to happen in terms of robotics. So you have your simple robotics, and then you have your advanced robotics. Our forecast, going by what BCG is saying, is that by 2025, 25% of all tasks in the world will be automated through robotics. Global cost in terms of labor savings or labor cost savings is estimated to be about 16%. And this will be a combination of simple as well as advanced robotics, which even include decision making. The advantage here, even though robotics threatens traditional industries such as manufacturing, etc., there's a huge opportunity too. Small and medium enterprises, while using robotics, can enter a market faster and introduce a disruptive product much faster, right? So that also brings along a simultaneous opportunity. So while the amount of what I would say investment into robotics, while large companies may not be the fueling factor, I would think that the pervasion of smaller and medium enterprises into markets using robotics technologies will be much more higher. And of course, wherever 100% of jobs inside an SME cannot be automated, there will be jobs that will still require humans, especially in R&D, especially in core back office functions and things like that. So that will also aid employment on the side. Moving on. This is what we call the wheel of disruption. Probably all of you know this, right? In the middle, you have the technology layer. In the center, you have the technology layer, which is cloud and all of the disruptive trends and technologies which we just spoke about. Surrounding that is the interaction layer. It can be via apps, it can be ephemeral, it can be gamification, geolocation, anything. And then on the outside, on the perimeter, is what we call the hardware layer, which is what we all use in terms of the way we interact with technology. So I would believe that all of this is what is aiding disruption at this point. For example, some of the concepts we talked about, virtual AI and AR, wearables, you have, I can't read that any better. Payments, right? Mobile payments is another market that's about to be disrupted, the way we know it. Sooner or later, they're saying credit cards are not going to be required. Why do I need it? I have Apple Pay on my watch, right? I don't need a credit card anymore. Your wearable is going to be intertwined with your bank account, so closely that you wouldn't need a reason to carry cash or an equivalent. All right, so that's about what's happening in the economy. So how is it that Wipro as a company is responding to this? So moving on. So we do have what I would call a technological office within our company. This is what we feel the opportunity is, out there. Digital. Some of us talked about this. We do have a function called Wipro Digital, or rather, a small arm within Wipro, which is called Wipro Digital. We see the opportunity at about $225 billion when existing companies move, their assets to the cloud. The current market as we know it, which is the run market, is estimated to be about $940 billion. The Indian pie in this by 2020 is estimated to be about $204 billion. The Internet of Things as an economy, about $1.8 trillion. And lastly, the as-a-service economy. This is one of the biggest or one of the most crucial areas that Wipro is placing its bets on. That is that the consumption of technology and services in the future is going to be radically different from the way it is today, wherein consumers are going to pay by outcomes and not by what I would say processes or legacy capital, but rather as a service. So moving on, our strategy, we have different strategies for run and we have different strategies for change, right? So for run, I think we will continue to drive market share in our core businesses through domain and technologies, and we will make prioritized investments on solutions through verticals, service lines, and geographies. We will deliver significant cost optimization through hyper-automation, not just automation, not simple robotics. And for this purpose, we launched India's first artificial intelligence platform last year called Homes. Now, this is something that more than 50 of our customers have embraced, and we have use cases which are running. The difference between this and robotics is that a traditional robot doesn't have the capability to learn, whereas Homes is a natural learning engine. It is cognitive, it's a cognitive platform, and it is available on what I would call a piecemeal basis to fit in an end-to-end utility model. In owning the future, I think change, we talked about how we are moving to digital. We continue to harbor a domain and technology innovation ecosystem through our mergers and acquisitions. We have also formed a $100 billion Wipro Ventures, $100 million Wipro Ventures fund within Wipro to invest in companies which have the potential of introducing technologies of the future. And then for the future, everything as a service, or what we call XaaS, and of course, open stacks, software-defined environments for IT, and lastly, artificial intelligence, which we spoke about. Moving on. This goes to define what I just spoke about. Cognitive systems, we spoke about smart devices. I think we covered in the human-machine interface, which is the third one in case that's not really visible. We are looking at capabilities in devices and sensors, gesture recognition, augmented and virtual reality, into gaming and gamification as services, and of course, the natural machine interaction. Next-gen application architectures, we're focusing on open technologies, which is open source technologies. We are looking at more effectiveness rather than efficiencies. And lastly, we're trying to remove the boundaries between personal and enterprise computing. And a software-defined everything. As we go forward, IT teams across the globe will have a big challenge in their hand. On one side, you have capital deficiencies, for investments. And on the other hand, you have limited IT assets. Right? And you can't displace IT assets from one part of the world to move to another part of the world just because there is demand, in that side. So IT is going to be a huge bottleneck. The only way you can maximize the effectiveness of your IT is if you work on the intersection between your computing infra as well as virtualization. You have to define everything on software-based terms so that you can adjust the workload of your IT systems globally. Moving on, and last but not the least, the topic of interest in the room, which is what are we doing on BPS? We see these as trends for BPS in the future. We believe that a large part of our BPS engagements will focus on analytics, We are not not saying that the future of customer satisfaction is going to be measured on traditional matrices like was a survey filled out, was a CSAT checked, etc. But rather, it's going to be end-to-end customer experience management. And you're going to track a customer by things like loyalty scores, churn, the amount of revenue they generate for you, the ability for the customer to permeate into different processes. Like, for example, if you're a bank, he takes a loan from you for his car, he takes a loan for you from his house, he has a credit card with you, he has a deposit account with you. Those are the matrices that we want to try and track. We are extending the customer service or the front office rigor into the middle and back office processes. So things like risk management, legal processes outsourcing, sales and marketing, these will be cornerstones of the future BPO activity. E-commerce is driving a lot of traction in BPO. So things like billings and collections, order processing, customer care and payments are being rapidly, what I would say, are developing because of greater and greater e-commerce movement by traditional companies. We are also looking to diversify into what we call O-commerce or omni-channel commerce, right? Because these days, you don't expect a customer, to just buy products the conventional way. Customers interact with companies and buy products through multiple channels, and integrating all of them and improving things like what we call a browse-to-buy ecosystem, increase their rate of technology adoption, and improvement of supply chain will be the cornerstone of this. Last but not the least, I will talk about business process as a service. This is a fundamental shift from the BPO that we know. Traditional BPO models have been very fixed contracts, right? You deploy so many FTEs and you get so much of billing, right? I think the future of BPO will be about not in the same model. It will be about platform-based. You will have a process, but I think customers will start choosing to pay by use. So this is what we call the emergence of an as-a-service economy. We will have to find different ways to license our platforms, on pay-per-use capabilities. So converting traditional CapEx-based projects into more OpEx or operational, based programs. So this is something where we are putting a lot of investment into. This just is a linear graph which just shows where we think the BPO was and where it's going. I mean, just to elaborate on what we spoke about. So that's BPO 1.0, which is cost and quality. The second one was all about standardization, and a lot of lean and Six Sigma improvement, which is BPO 2.0. The last generation of BPO as we know it was more outcome-based. There were investments into what I would call platform, verticalization, etc. And the current generation and the future to come will be all about business process as a service. And we are also going to see what I would call an advent of artificial intelligence, which is also coming into some of our BPO offerings, which we are offering globally. Well, the last couple of slides are what I would our elevator presentations of our artificial intelligence platform to describe some of the use cases that we have. Let's skip through the slide. So that, can we go back? Yeah. So this is basically, what we call a Holmes intervention into smarter sales. And the last is, the next one is about automated approvals of health claim management, wherein the decision making is not left to the underwriter or the person who basically approves the claim basis the exception, but you're training an AI to do it. In addition to this, we have various other use cases, on fraud management. We have use cases on know your customer activities, etc., which are available to market at this point. So, in conclusion, I would say that this is a period of radical change. There are a lot of disruptions. The economy is changing, but we are confident that with the investments that we are making, both on technology as well as training, our people in terms of how to embrace these technologies, right, will pave way for a more positive future. And if I did not emphasize it before, one final word, save the planet. It's the only one we have. And Richard, thank you for the opportunity. And Rebecca, thank you. It's really an honor to have spoken here, and I look forward to the next time we meet. Thank you very much.